Some years ago, while teaching at Virginia Commonwealth University, I was making my way to the Philosophy and Religious Studies department late one afternoon when I had a mishap. Like many of you who have taken a fall, I'm not absolutely sure what happened, but I think when I stepped off the sidewalk to cross the street, the pavement must have been uneven, and I twisted my ankle, which caused the rest of me to fall face forward into the street. Those of you who have twisted your ankles know that sometimes it can be as painful as breaking an ankle. So I didn't immediately jump up, but lay there in the street with a briefcase beside me and a stack of books that I was carrying spread out before me in the street. It is to say that I looked like an instructor who had taken a fall and was in need of some help. I think I probably laid there for 30 to 40 seconds before regaining my composure, and several people walked by while I was laying there gnashing my teeth in obvious pain. No one stopped. I finally managed to get myself back on my feet, gather my things up, and hobbled to the office where I was headed. On a campus of higher education, no one exhibited the wisdom of simple compassion and concern. Some of you will remember a trip I shared about this past summer after returning from Philadelphia with a group of our youth on a missions trip. We were in a rough part of Philadelphia, and I was standing on the porch of a house where a ministry is located. I noticed a person passed out on the other side of the street, and no one going to assist. About this time, a couple of Methodist ministers who were coming to a meeting at that house arrived, and after introductions, I pointed to the person across the street and posed the question of what we should do. No one said anything. And I was thinking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. So finally I said, I'm going to go over there and see what's going on. If I get in trouble, call the police. When I got over top the person, I assumed it was a man. And I said, brother, can you wake up? Can you open your eyes for me? I said it several times, and it had no effect. About that time, I noticed a police officer sitting in his cruiser in the middle of the street. So I went over and told him what was going on, and he said that he would take care of it. One of the people living in that neighborhood said to me, "She's a drug addict. The rain will make her get up and move." Now, I knew that Philadelphia's tough. I mean, they threw snowballs at Santa one time during an Eagles game. But this seemed to take it to a whole different level. I attended a retreat at Montreat, North Carolina this past fall, and had the privilege of hearing Professor Raj Nadilla reflect on our scripture reading this morning. Yes, I was at a Presbyterian conference in a Presbyterian retreat center listening to a Presbyterian New Testament professor. So if you don't like this sermon, blame it on the Presbyterians. Professor Nadilla talked about how when the prophet finds himself in the valley of dry bones, he conveys no sense of horror or shock, that he's desensitized that whereas he should have been outraged, it seems that he has become accustomed to death-dealing ways. Although Professor Nadilla did not contrast it with other examples, let me expand upon his insight by reminding you of other responses when people in the Bible find themselves in similar circumstances. In the 6th chapter of Isaiah, many of you are familiar with verse 5. "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Jeremiah 1:6, we find this response. "Ah, sovereign Lord," I said, "I do not know how to speak. I am too young." Think of Luke 5:8 after Jesus tells Peter to cast his net on the other side of the boat, and Peter's pretty much told Jesus that he doesn't know what he's talking about. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." Or think of the opening chapter of the book of Revelation, where the visionary John reports in verse 17, "When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, 'Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last.'" Even Ezekiel, in chapter 1, verse 28, relates, "When I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking." Or chapter 2, verse 15, "And there, where they were living, I sat among them for 7 days, deeply distressed." Yet by the time that we get to chapter 37 in the Valley of Dry Bones, which was much more shocking than other things that he had been shown, the prophet reacts as if he's taking a stroll through the park. I think Professor Nadilla was onto something profoundly significant when he observed that the prophet conveys no sense of horror and appears to have become accustomed to death-dealing ways. If Professor Nadilla is onto something in his observations, then I think the question becomes, how have we allowed ourselves to become desensitized? And I'm particularly concerned with how we have become desensitized theologically. With all of our screens and technology, where we can watch horrific events in real time, where we are continuously assaulted with reports of sin and suffering, where we are fed a steady diet of a polarized culture, where those different from us are evil and to be hated, it's all too easy to become desensitized theologically and walk through a valley of dry bones as if it's business as usual, the way things are. The good news is that God, unlike us, does not get desensitized, but remains determined in the work of redemption. God tells the somewhat unaffected prophet in our scripture reading, "Son of man, these bones are the house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, my people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. I will put my spirit in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, that I have done it, declares the Lord. Just because we may have allowed ourselves to become desensitized doesn't mean that God has, or that God is going to allow us to stay this way. This is both hopeful and unsettling for me personally. I spend a lot of time being a cynic. But the God of Ezekiel in the biblical text is no cynic. Cynicism, at least my cynicism, is an intellectual defense mechanism. You can't hurt me when I don't expect anything in the first place. It's a facade that, if allowed to harden, can suffocate us. The Bible talks about hearts of stone. This is what cynicism will do to us. You may not hurt, but you also don't experience much joy. Hearts of flesh can get broken. But you know that old adage about better to have loved and lost at love than never to have loved at all. Love comes at a cost. Just ask anyone grieving the death of a loved one. Yet they wouldn't want it any different, because their grief, painful as it is, reflects the significance of the love that was shared. Cable network news channels and social media can quickly make us cynics and desensitize us theologically. But the God of Ezekiel can take dry bones and bring them back to life. So there is hope for me and you. I read a book by Julia Alvarez entitled A Wedding in Haiti. She had some good lines, which I'm going to share with you so that you don't have to read the book. She writes, "P.T., remember when I first met you, I asked him, you were flying a kite. He was not much older than the three boys looking over at us. Now, P.T. is a man with a wife and a daughter. This is what life offers as compensation for the old ones going out, the young ones coming in. The mortal traffic can be dizzying, especially when yours is the next generation on its way out. But as a friend once told me, after 50, our job is to keep our spirits up so as not to scare the ones who are coming after us. There's been a lot of anxiety and angst about how few young people are active in churches. And it may be that the advice of Alvarez's friend has a great deal of wisdom for folks who have become theologically desensitized. Our job is to keep our spirits up so as not to scare the ones who are coming after us. Now, it takes more than just a Pollyanna attitude to be a part of what God can do in a valley of dry bones. It takes real work, like slowing down to smile and saying, "Thank you," or "Can I help you?" It means turning away from the screen and toward the people in the room with you. It means becoming human again. Alvarez has another good line in her book. She relates, as our yoga teacher often reminds us, when we're straining to hold our downward dog pose, there are two kinds of pain: the pain of doing yoga and the pain of not doing yoga. Life is going to be complicated, no matter what. So you might as well open the door and invite it into your house. During the last 2 weeks, I've been sharing stories with you from Diane Komp, a pediatric oncologist who practiced and taught at Yale Medical School. I first shared her story of Anna, who asked her mother if she could see the angels and hear the beautiful singing just before she died. Then last week, I shared the story of the man who had a similar experience with a child, which he shared after hearing the story about Anna and how it enabled him to overcome alcoholism. Komp writes, "I cannot report that the choir of angels resulted in a dramatic conversion experience or an instant adoption of the traditional beliefs that I had abandoned. For me, it was a prologue. The experience posed important questions and hinted at answers that might follow. A prologue tunes our ears to the composer's desired cadences and relegates former dominating themes to less active memory. My heart remained unsure when I left Anna's hospital room, but my ear was definitely retuned. Although physicians do not generally recognize it, our ears are regularly retuned. We pride ourselves in being objective and complete in our observations and hearing and telling the whole story. The fact is that as long as it's a human listener who is recording the facts, the truth is filtered through personal experience. If a fact does not make sense to us, we do not even hear it. Once I caught this cadence of old familiar truth, I realized that in my acquired deafness, I might not know everything about my patients that was important to know. With the returning of my ear, I became a more objective, less censoring listener. My introduction to Mary Beth came somewhat later. She was 6 years old when she was diagnosed with cancer. After a brief period out of the hospital, her disease returned. In deference to her parents' wishes, her worsening condition was not discussed in her presence. The change in treatment meant that Mary Beth would need to be admitted to the hospital shortly before Christmas. She wasn't afraid of the hospital because she had made friends with the nurses on the pediatric ward at the time of her first admission. A holiday party was planned for the children, and Mary Beth's favorite nurse bought her a red velvet dress to wear. Mysteriously, the child refused to wear it for reasons she firmly declined to discuss. Mary Beth was fond of pretty dresses, and so her behavior was very much out of character. After she completed her treatment, her blood counts indicated that she was not responding. The child's poor prognosis was discussed with her family, and Mary Beth was discharged to come back to visit as an outpatient. At the time of a return visit, Her mother confessed to being baffled by a dream that the child shared with her. She asked me what I thought it meant. Mary Beth told her mother that Jesus came to her in a dream with one of her grandfathers who had died before she was born. Together, Jesus and her grandfather told her of her impending death and encouraged her not to be afraid. She awoke with the peace and reassurance that soon she would be with Jesus and her grandfather. She had never met that grandfather, but recognized him from family photographs. It was her absolute peace that baffled her mother. Mary Beth died at home on Christmas Eve and was dressed in her new red velvet dress when, at the funeral, her brief life was finally celebrated. Although her mother was baffled by the dream, my previous experience with Anna and other children had opened a window for me that had long been tightly shuttered. I recognized a pattern in their stories that helped me re-examine systems of belief that lay on the other side of the window. As we experience the forces that cause theological desensitization, let us keep looking on the other side of the window.